Welcome back. President Trump tweeting overnight after an urgent phone call with his South Korean counterpart, applauding a unanimous UN vote to impose a massive sanctions bill on North Korea amid some new threats from the rogue regime. Here to explain the significance of these sanctions, Hudson Institute fellow and national security expert Rebeccah Heinrichs. Rebeccah, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Heather.
So we've heard about sanctions before on North Korea. Why are these different? Let's begin there.
Well, first of all, there's this myth that there was nothing else to sanction in North Korea, and Nikki Haley and President Trump and Rex Tillerson, our Secretary of State, proved that wrong. This is a major foreign policy accomplishment for the Trump administration because these are massive, sweeping sanctions, and that we got everybody on board at the UN Security Council is a big deal. So this is going to really squeeze the North Korean regime about as much up to a third of their export revenues that they make. Now, the key now, though, is to see if China is actually going to enforce these sanctions and if China isn't going to look for other opportunities to make up for the revenue loss for the North Koreans.
We'll talk a little bit more about China, but let's take a look specifically at the sanctions, which have been approved, as we mentioned, 15-0 unanimously across the board. Supposedly will ban coal and other exports worth over $1 billion. You can see the other exports there in addition to coal. But you were referencing China, and I know specifically in terms of the sanctions that have been placed before on North Korea, coal specifically was one that China, disregarded.
Well, there was some indication that there may have been a little bit of a dip with Chinese imports, but then what the Chinese did was, well, first of all, there's a humanitarian loophole that said that if some of the Chinese exports, the revenues that was made, went to the North Korean civilians, that would be acceptable. But that was a farce. And the North Koreans don't care about their civilians, they don't care about their people, and so all of that money, all of that revenue actually went to the military and to the missile program. So there are no more loopholes like that. But again, the Chinese, even when things like coal were sanctioned, the Chinese looked for other opportunities to increase, for instance, seafood and minerals and other goods like that. But those are covered in the sanctions that were just passed. And so, again, this is really going to squeeze the regime as long as they're enforced.
And there were some other things that we didn't get. One of them was oil. Is that right?
That's correct, and the North Koreans rely on that as well. And so there's more headroom here if we want to push down further on the regime. And again, I've talked about this before on your show too. There's secondary sanctions. There's in Malaysia and Singapore and China and African countries. There are also banks that are propping up the financial networks of the North Koreans too, that also prop up the regime. And so there's still other things that we can do, but this is a very significant step. And it also shows that the Trump administration does have significant leadership clout in the world, that they're able to push this and get some really good, solid, biting sanctions that can really clamp down on the regime and stop the money from pouring into their missile program.
And do you think Russia will cooperate?
I think so. I mean, President Trump sort of has this reputation of being unpredictable. People aren't really sure. And I think you have the Russians and the Chinese who are now looking at this president and saying, he's serious about this North Korean regime, and we better get on board because we don't know what he's going to do, because the American government will not allow the North Koreans to threaten the American people with a nuclear-capable ballistic missile. And that is something that they've demonstrated that they likely have the capability to do now.
Now we have to get it under control. We'll see if they cooperate this time. Thank you so much, Rebeccah. Appreciate your insight always.
Thank you.